Hello and welcome to The Sound Test Room. My name is Jakob, I'm your host and you're watching a haQ episode. This is zMors EQ. A very powerful EQ. It's an audio unit only, so you have to use it inside a DAW, like I'm doing right here with Cubases. But you can also use ORM or GarageBand. In any way, I'm using zMors EQ to balance out some frequencies and make my track sound a little bit better. Well, at least in my own opinion. The hardest thing for me, at least, to balance the lower frequency spectrum in all of my tracks. And it's basically because I care so much about the drum parts and the bass parts. These two tracks have a lot in common when it comes to the lower frequency spectrum. The bass drum inside my bass track has a lot of the same lower end frequencies as the bass track itself. So they tend to fight over the same space. And that's when a good EQ comes in, and zMors EQ is certainly that. It's very, very powerful, and it's got all the equalizing tools you'll need to sculpt your sounds. So what I'm gonna do right now is I'm gonna play each of the tracks individually and I'm gonna A/B them for you so you can hear the differences with the equalizer on and off. But before we do that, I'm actually gonna turn off the reverb I'm using on the drum track. It's a new reverb, it just hit the App Store. It's called, I don't remember the long name, but if you search for DDMF on the App Store, you'll find it, and you can also find it down in the description. I'll put a link to it. It sounds really good and I'm gonna do a video about it, but not now. So let's turn that off. I'm gonna keep the compressors on both channels because you'll still be able to hear the differences in EQ. And right now the EQ is on, and I'll turn it off and on during playback. So as soon as I turn the equalizer off, you've got a bump part around 200 Hz, slightly behind it, that makes the snare sound as if it was trapped inside a jar or a small closed, well, it doesn't sound good, at least not in my ears. So with number 3, I actually put a dip around 168 Hz. So it's got a nice slope downwards right there. And when I did that, I removed some of that jar-like, box-like sound. I also put a dip around 39 Hz, and I did this because I don't want the bass drum to fight with the bass track. Now I did put a bump at 66 Hz. This could lead to some fights between my bass track and my drum track, but I just really liked how the drum sounded with this bump right here, so I'm gonna keep it until I hear clear problems with it. I also put a bump around 2000 kHz because I want the higher frequencies in the snare drum to be more pronounced. There's also a bump around 12 kHz, and that's just to help out the hi-hat stick out a bit more. Let's jump down to the next track. So this is the bass track, and these are sounds that were made using Waldorf Nave. I think there's about 4 or 5 or 6 presets that make up this bass track, and those presets can actually be downloaded because they're part of my 64 presets for Nave bank that I gave away a little while ago. I'll put a link down in the description, or if you can't wait and don't want to watch this video anymore, you could just click this card and go to that video instantly. Alright, so let's do some A/Bing with the bass sound. But as you could hear, there were quite a lot of different types of sounds inside my bass track. So to make it more consistent, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna choose the first 4 bars and I'm gonna copy them and paste them so we get the same loop running over and over. The equalizer is on. Now, it can be a bit harder to distinguish what I've actually done. It depends on how trained your ears are. The first thing I always do with my bass presets is I actually put a bump around 12,000 Hz, and I know that these frequencies usually fight with the hi-hats and other high frequency sounds. I do that to make my bass sound a bit more crisp. I even make sure to add a little bit of crisp into my presets when I make them. I also go down in the frequency band, and I always put a little bump around 50 Hz, and in this case I'll put it around 44 Hz. So you can hear that as soon as I turn the equalizer on, we get a bit more sub bass. I've also put a dip around 200 Hz, and I do this because I don't want the bass to fight with the snare drum character in the drum track. A snare usually has its character around 200 Hz, and I did EQ away a lot of frequencies around 168 Hz inside the drum track. So to make sure that the snare drum is still pretty prominent, I just put a dip around 200 Hz in the bass track. I put a little bump around 1000 Hz because I just want the vocal part of my bass to pop out a little bit more. A very gentle and wide downwards pointing slope around 3000 kilohertz. There are some frequencies in my bass that I just don't want them there, and in my ears it just sounded good. I can't explain it in any other way. As you understand, this is not a review of zMors EQ. I've already adopted it, I love it, and I didn't feel like reviewing it. I felt like doing a video where I'm actually using the thing. And since it's an audio unit, I just love it that I can load it up in several instances because it really sounds good. It's very, very powerful, and it's easy to sculpt and craft your sounds. So for the last bit of the video, I'm gonna A/B both tracks with and without equalizers. Well, that's basically it. Now you can use any type of equalizer, but I do recommend going and checking out zMors Equalizer because it's really, really good. I'm not telling you to buy it, but if you want, there's an app link down in the description. As usual, Doug Woods, Colin Sweeney, and me, Jakob, at soundteststream.com, wishes you a very productive week. Now go finger your stuff and have a lot of fun doing it.